Political violence is clearly on the rise. We're seeing so many incidents, from President Trump's attempted assassination to the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, being assassinated. A gunman killed 2 Embassy of Israel staff members who were leaving young diplomats' reception at the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's mansion was broken into and set on fire. Tesla vehicles have been torched, and bullets as well as Molotov cocktails were aimed at the company's showrooms. Then there were the 2 Minnesota state lawmakers who were fatally shot in their homes, along with their spouses. In March, a fire was set to the entryway to the New Mexico Republican Party headquarters. Meanwhile, BB pallets and gunshots were fired at the front door and the window of the Democratic National Committee office in Arizona on 3 separate occasions last fall. Nancy Pelosi's husband was bludgeoned with a hammer in his home. His attacker, later in court, admitted that he had planned to hold the speaker hostage to quote-unquote end government corruption. Individuals, including some from extremist groups, had stormed the Capitol to protest the 2020 presidential election results. And then Eric Coomer, an executive at Dominion Voting Systems, was forced into hiding after his personal home address was published and $1 million bounty was put on his head. And now we have the successful assassination of political commentator Charlie Kirk. This is not just a list of isolated incidents. It feels like there's an escalation of political violence, and research data seems to support that perception. But beyond the violence itself, what's perhaps even more disturbing and alarming is the growing justification and celebration of it, which in turn may fuel more violence. It's not so different from those who hailed Hamas as the resistance after October 7th, when they murdered, tortured, and kidnapped civilians intentionally, including children. That too was framed as righteous action justified by political grievances. Yes, we all have different perspectives. One could argue, even very persuasively, that United Healthcare is deeply corrupt and complicit in countless deaths, making its CEO complicit in those. And those who saw October 7th as justified point to the displacement of Palestinians and decades of Israeli policy as justification. Those who are now cheering Kirk's death see him as a misogynist, a transphobe, and a gun advocate, someone whose influence in their eyes made life worse for many. His assassination, they believe, is a net positive. But what kind of society do we become if we decide that disagreement warrants death? If we trade words for bullets? Who decides who deserves to be punished and for what? Yes, there will always be unhinged individuals who turn to violence, whether because of political rhetoric or the strange voices in their heads or visions. But when violence is normalized and worse, applauded, that's when our society has been infected by something rather sinister. And we've crossed over to something so much darker. And that's what seems to be happening now. Because in a functioning society, we meet arguments with arguments. We change bad laws through legal and democratic processes. We prosecute crimes in court with due process, not by mob vengeance. When policies need changing, we have mechanisms through which this can be accomplished, legal and social. Yes, sometimes violence signals that these systems are failing, that people feel powerless and unheard. But that does not justify abandoning the systems entirely. It just means we must work together to make those systems better. Our legal framework is, of course, imperfect. But at least it's universal. It provides evidence, defense, and appeal. It is hard-won safeguard against raw vengeance. When we abandon that framework and decide, this person deserves to die because I believe that they are harmful, we make ourselves judge, jury, and executioner. And no one person should have that kind of power. And if everyone has that right, we welcome in a very dark and very dangerous world. Because the person standing next to you might have a very different definition and idea of who is deserving of death, of being punished to death. Today's Charlie Kirk, or an insurance CEO. Tomorrow, it might be your local farmer who raises livestock for human consumption, or a car manufacturer whose emissions are a little bit too high, or a professor who teaches socialism. Everyone has opinions. And do we really want to live in a world where these opinions are enforced with bullets and bombs and Molotov cocktails? Justice should not be decided by whoever is angriest or most willing to use violence. When disagreement becomes grounds for assassination, then we are no longer living in a society that values pluralism and persuasion and debate. We live in a society that's ruled by fear and force. And do we really believe that the most violent amongst us is also the wisest? That they should decide who lives and who dies? Is that whom we really want to put in charge of that? When you normalize the idea of political violence and justify murdering others because we are right and this person is bad, then eventually your opponents will also feel justified to do the same. And this cannot end well. It never does. Political violence doesn't just remove an individual from the conversation. It silences everyone who witnesses it. If you know that speaking out can get you killed, you start to self-censor. And today's silenced voices may be ones that you disagree with, but tomorrow's might be the ones you very much agree with, or in fact, it might be your own. One can condemn Charlie Kirk's rhetoric if you disagree with it without condoning his murder. One can vehemently disagree with him or others while also defending their right to speak and stay alive while doing so. Our polarization is feeding a culture where disputes are no longer resolved through conversation, but through force and bullets. In such a world, power belongs to those most willing to kill for it. And that is not justice, that is terror.